Hey, here we are at Psych 560, Virtuality, one Foundation of Virtuality module. So what is virtuality? So in the context of your textbook, it's a very philosophical concept. They say it's elusive as the concept of reality. So this becomes very heady, very philosophical. What is reality? We could fall down the rabbit hole on that. For quite some time, we were starting to debate what is reality? What does reality mean? How do we define reality? And you'll note even within the textbook that the author says, well, I'll let you, the reader, determine and decide after reading the different perspectives. So while it is very interesting to have the different perspectives and different authors who talk about all of these different abstract concepts and philosophical concepts, and even going back to mythology and really getting into this very interesting and philosophical discussion about reality and virtuality. For practical purposes of this class, we're going to just use it as a blanket concept for all things virtual. So we talk about virtuality for this class, and for the chapters that we're going to read, we're going to talk about virtual characters, virtual environment, and of course, virtual reality. So virtuality is this very big umbrella. And so we're going to pick a couple of very specific, very practical concepts of it. But and if you look into your textbook, when they do define it, I think that it can be a little bit easy to get perhaps a little bit lost in terms of like when they talk about translating art and paintings. And I mean, it's very, very interesting things, but I think for the purpose of a some course, when we talk about virtuality, and we're going to talk about it as the blanket concept for what we're going to call all things virtual. So virtuality. Looking at then, what is virtual reality? So virtual reality, it's a technology, and it convinces the participant that he or she is there, that they're in another place, right? And this is by substituting primary sensory input, okay, with data received or produced by a computer. So that's the virtual piece, okay? So the computer, this virtual abstract, is convincing your brain or a part of the human experience that you're inputting data that's produced by a computer visually, emotionally, the way that you connect to people, like the human experience, something about that is being manipulated by something. Now, stepping back, we think, well, okay, so that happens all the time. I watch a movie, I read a book, I really connect to a character, and there's something about this world. Like if there's something about reading Harry Potter or watching Lord of the Rings, where you get transported and taken away to this other world, and it becomes very immersive, right? Well, what we're talking about here, though, when we talk about virtual reality, much like cyber psychology or any of the other topics that we have to talk about, that part, that data produced by a computer, right? And so when the virtual world becomes a workscape, and the user identifies with the virtual body and feels a sense of belonging to a virtual community. So again, going to make sure that what makes this virtual is the computer piece. This is why we're studying this as part of cyber psychology, because it's taking something that it is computer based. It is something that a computer is producing. It's a technology. And so we can say, well, why study this? What could happen with this? And so when we look at the potential for VR and AR, so virtual reality and augmented reality applications, and so they look at software, different use cases, predicting all the way to 2025, and we're really looking at quite a range. So video games, that's right now where a large percent of the market is, of course, it's video games, and how close to real life can they make it, and how immersive. And if you get really into studying the psychology of video games, presence and immersion are essential into that. And we're going to talk a lot about that next week, about in the next module, about presence and immersion, because that really is the most essential parts of any kind of VR or AR application. But also looking at using it for healthcare, engineering, real estate, retail, military, education. And so we're going to talk about all of this and all of this use of the potential for these technologies. But that's what they are right now, are these developing technologies and using computers to create an environment, to create a reality. And so using it, in some cases, using this virtual reality as a way to help people in actual reality. So for example, if let's say you wanted to practice a job interview and you were able to go put your VR headset on and you're actually in that environment and you practice it and practice it and you practice it and you have a actual simulation of the person who is interviewing you, and you're able to practice it to the point where by the time that you get there, it feels very familiar to you. Or in healthcare, we'll talk about this too in VR therapy, but somebody who has a phobia of, say, snakes or spiders, and so put them in an environment virtually where their phobia is there and they can work through that without actually having to physically or actually interact in reality. They can just take the headset off. So this notion, this new and up this field of the potential for virtual reality is something that will grow and is being worked on, but also we're trying to understand it. And what does it mean to have what we know is reality, and then to have this virtual reality? Is it the same? Does it mirror it? Is it dual to it? And this gets really thorny when we talk about laws and forensics. And well, what does it mean if somebody, for example, we look at the worst case scenario is looking at or say dating or looking or involved in a romantic environment and that is considered pedophilia. Well, that is very, very, there are very clear laws about that in reality. Is there a law in virtual reality? And so, okay, so if I am a 30-year-old female and I have an avatar that is a 16-year-old, so it's not really 16, just pretends to be 16, just looks like it's 16, who engages in a relationship, is that legal? Is that okay? Is it not? You know, where's the ethics and legality of that? And so really we're trying to, as a society, figure out what is virtual reality and what are the rules there? What does it mean when you engage with somebody in a virtual environment? And we've talked a lot about this in different classes in terms of, one moment. There, sorry, little blip. Okay, so we talked a lot about this in other classes in terms of being able to disassociate when you're not actually in front of somebody. That what happens is when somebody can say, they can insult somebody because they have that ability to dissociate because they're not actually in front of them. So reasons why we are studying VR and AR. So how does VR work? So in the most traditional sense, the main technical components, you have your VR headset, you've got sensory tracking involved in it somewhere in the headset or on you, and then a source of computing power. So now the computing power is the essential part of it. That's what makes it the virtual reality for us. And depending on the system, it may also include controllers. So avatars. Avatars are digital representation of a human being in a virtual world. And you must be able to replicate the human experience wherever it embodies its worldliness. And personalization of the avatar can be part of the user's reality. It can be a fixed object in the screen, or it can be a dialogue provided by the user's experience. So the avatar is, think of it as you in the world. So whether it is just a picture of yourself that you've connected to, whether it is a character in a video game that you've created, whether it is a character in a virtual environment that you've created, if you play Second Life or you play Sims or you even play any kind of video game, it is whatever that virtual or digital character is that you are connected to. So, I mean, even with video games, so if you're playing a video game and you craft the character, and if you've done this, you can choose the hair and you can choose the gender and you can choose all sorts of things. You're choosing that to match some part of you. It's what represents you in that virtual environment or world. So when I go and I watch, say, Harry Potter, I may connect to Harry Potter in some way, but he is not the embodiment that I have created. Now, if I was playing a Harry Potter game and I got to create my own character to go live in Hogwarts, which I think you can do, I think there's now an app that can do that, and I gave the character blonde hair and my favorite color for a dress or whatever it is, that would be my avatar. And it is my expression within this digital world. So when you think about where do you have avatars, where have you chosen to create a representation of yourself, whether it can be even a picture of yourself or a cartoon of yourself or a video game, or where have you been someplace in a virtual world or a game or something where you have represented yourself and created an avatar. So also looking at augmented versus virtual reality. So when we look at augmented reality, it's a mix of the virtual world and the real world, and it lets people interact with both. So generally achieved with holding the phone in front of you. So augmented reality, when Pokemon Go came out and you had people holding up their phones and looking all around because they were trying to see whatever was in their room or at a particular location. And so that was augmented reality, because you could be looking at the Eiffel Tower, and that was real, but then underneath whatever little Pokemon character you had was not real, but it was augmented in that reality. You can interact with those characters. And so that became very, very popular in terms of augmented reality. Virtual reality is creating an entirely virtual world. And so it becomes very hard to differentiate between what is real and what is not. And this is really generally achieved with wearing a helmet or goggles. And I'll probably bring this example up a couple of times because it was so succinct. And so this, if I was going to be writing the paper, the self-reflection paper, for example, when I went to a Star Wars virtual experience. I had to put the backpack on and the headset on. And the first thing that they have to do is walking over this lava pit. Now, in my mind, I know I'm not walking over hot lava, okay? But in the headset, because it is completely, I'm immersed within this world, this entire virtual world. My brain was like stepping very closely and watching where I was going and trying not to fall in. And it's what's really interesting about this virtual reality and that whole experience, that when I think of VR, I reflect on how immersed I was within that world. And whereas augmented reality, it's just taking a piece of something virtual and placing it into reality. So with virtual reality, sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. And so there's immersion and presence, which we'll go into a lot later. That has to go way up for virtual reality to become all-encompassing as it really can be. And so our immersion and our presence, these two very important concepts. So immersion, so it's the quality or the quantity, the sensory information, okay, and that's being provided to people. So say from a video game, but from VR or anything in general. Video game is just where we see it the most, because, or in the movies, because we really want them to be in that world. So if you go into a movie and you don't feel like, oh, I'm really in this world of Harry Potter, I'm in this world of the Avengers or whatever it is, you're not getting that sensory information. So why TV screens are getting bigger and auditory is getting better. And we really want to be immersed in that world. Now, so immersion is something we use a little bit more loosely. So we can say, okay, so immersion, we might see that in a video game. It's why it's generally associated with video games or with movies, or we've used that term fairly loosely. So I think you'll recognize that. With presence, the subjective feeling of being in a virtual environment, and where the viewer becomes almost unaware of the technological medium when the environment is being presented. All right. So when I talked about being in this lava environment, okay, that was complete presence. Even though logically I knew I am not about to fall into a pit of lava, my whole body, my whole brain, everything about me was reacting as though this was something that was happening. Like I was walking across a bridge. I walked across that bridge the same way I would walk across a bridge in real life. And it was because I was completely enveloped in terms of presence. And so this is one of the things with virtual reality, where presence becomes such an important concept to really understand, because that is the point in which when we really may question where is reality and where is virtual reality. Because if you have a sense of presence in both, where you're not really, is it reality or is it just a technological medium? that becomes really the question. And so going back to Ready Player One, that whole world, everything that they were in, there was such immersion to it, and they clearly felt a sense of presence into it, that was almost more of their reality, where more of their personality, more of their relationships, more of their sense of self, more of their day-to-day living was spent than actual reality. Okay, so to the point where so many people want to be in the virtual world that they were spending more time in this virtual environment than not. If you read about Second Life, I have not personally played it, but if you talk to people who have and you've read about it, there was a great deal of immersion and presence in that, and maybe a little bit more immersion, less presence, because it wasn't as visually immersive, still a computer game, but people were very, very much involved in this world and interacting with other people. This happens a lot actually with multiplayer games. And I've known people that, this is mainly when I remember being in college, or not, people would say, hey, do you want to go out? I said, no, I can't. My guild's going off on this, we're doing this assignment together, and we're like, it's Friday, like we want to hang out with our friend. Why aren't you coming out? No, they couldn't, because they had to do things with their online group. And the thing is, so that those relationships, those friendships with people that they had met only online as part of this online guild was very real to them, and it's just as important as their friends and their real life was. So always looking at, when we create a virtual environment, of what the immersion and the presence, and where is somebody in terms of the spectrum on these. How present are they? How immersed are they in this world? And so why is VR used? What does it mean? So active participation within a 3D world. So times we're just trying to understand the world around us. This is someplace that we can be an active participant in. We're learning how to manipulate different problems. It's like a trial and error place. You have a high level of control in a virtual environment. So let's say I want to have virtual therapy with a snake phobia. I don't have to worry about the snake actually biting me or doing something to me, because I can control the computer simulation. Maybe safer, less embarrassing if you're trying to practice something. It can be administered in a traditional setting. You don't actually have to go, say, out to the desert to find a snake or a tarantula or whatever it may be. Potential for visualization, active learning, encouraging and motivating. We can create fun learning environments. We talk about training simulations. You can objectively measure behavior. And so when you read different articles about studies that are done, how are they measuring behavior within a virtual reality? And you can individualize treatments. So this, when looking at, say, a educational model or a therapeutic modules, you can adjust, say again, that phobia of, are you afraid of snakes? Are you afraid of the dark? Or how do you respond to? And you can individualize the treatment in virtual worlds. What are the risks? There's always risks. So potential risk, disengagement with the real world. VR can replace reality. So kind of speaking up to my friends that, no, we can't go out. We're going to be doing whatever with our guild. May not necessarily be a problem, but when we look at any type of addiction or any type of negative behaviors, we're looking at, does it cause harmful behaviors? Are people losing their jobs because they don't want to be in the real world? They only want to be in this virtual world, or they get home and they're not spending time with their kids because they want to be in a virtual world. I mean, it is anything in excess. So we're always have to be looking at, okay, well, are you disengaged from the real world? Is it replacing the actual reality? Do they prefer VR to reality? If you don't like your world so much that you're escaping to virtual reality, you guys ask the question of, is that a risk? Is that an issue or a problem? Does it matter? Is that okay? And kind of it's a gray area. It's always situational. Of you can prefer virtual reality to reality, or maybe that is okay. Maybe you have a great support group. Maybe there's certain familiar situations where it's a getaway, or you're able to, for example, if you're a widow or widower and you're able to go into virtual reality and be in a grief counseling group with people that help you, and you prefer that to dealing with people in reality, is that a bad thing? I mean, there's a lot of gray areas here that are situational, but just like anything, we want to be able to look and say, okay, what's the motivation behind this? Is this a problem? Is this leading to the next one of an addiction to virtual reality? So again, now the behaviors are causing harm to the person's livelihood. They can't hold down a job because they only want to be in this virtual reality piece. They're losing their apartment. They're not able to function in reality because they're so committed to this virtual reality, which is not sustainable to their livelihood. Difficulty to distinguish between real and virtual. So false realities and virtual reality. And just because you have, say, a type of relationship or a friendship with somebody in a virtual world, it can be very different in a physical world. And so there can be issues with that if there's, say, somebody that you've met in virtually, and then they meet them in real life. That's one place where in cyber psychology, we may have talked about virtual versus real, but false realities in virtual reality do exist. I mean, so if somebody chooses an avatar that doesn't look like them, or is there what they see as their best image of themselves, and then that doesn't match their actual self, is that for the person who has difficulty distinguishing that a problem? Can there be psychological damage and identity problems? Does this create this duality of self when I can be this type of self in a real world, in this virtual world, versus who I am online? And familiar concepts to cyber psychologists, because I'm sure we've discussed the concept of self online, and that when you put yourself online, virtual reality or just simply social media, you can create this version of yourself. With social media, say in pictures, right? You can edit your pictures to look almost nothing like you, and then post them to Instagram, get lots of feedback on them, positive feedback on them. But is that you, or is this actually this image of yourself that you've put out there? What becomes the reality? And then a tangible piece of actual physical damage to the human body. Right now, VR-induced nausea and motion sickness, tripping over wires, eye damage from screens. And I was working with a remote company, and they invited me to participate in this this testing. It was completely VR, so they sent these VR headsets to everybody, Oculus, and then what they did is they were testing for remote companies that could all get together. So everybody in the company, hypothetically, according to their business model, would get a headset, and we could have VR meetings in this work environment that they had created. And it was conceptually really interesting, because they had like game areas, they had a yoga place that you could go to, they had a place you could just like shoot basketball, they had another room where you could actually have meetings and whiteboard meetings. And conceptually, it was actually the first step towards something I think was really interesting. Unfortunately, after about 30 minutes, the CEO had to just drop because he was feeling really sick. Shortly after that, then the same thing with human resources. And even me, after about like 35 minutes after everybody got off, I thought, okay, I'm fine. And then I felt so nauseous afterwards that I had to like lay down for about 45 minutes afterwards, which doesn't usually happen to me, but I don't usually spend that much time in a VR environment. But after about like 35, 40 minutes, I felt really nauseous. So that is something that there are potential risks for right now. That some people I've seen get put on a VR headset and within like 2 seconds feel sick. So mileage can vary, but certainly for that company that was trying to pitch to a remote company this concept of a virtual, like a company based in virtual reality, it wasn't practical because everybody would get sick. But I was fascinated by the concept of what that would be like to actually be in a meeting with everybody, not just on Zoom, but in a virtual meeting world. I still think that is really, really interesting. And I hope that the technology does catch up to not make everybody sick. So some of the risks in mental and physical, emotional involvement, blurring of boundaries, alienation, addiction, long-term damage, social risks, the values, slander and intimidations, virtual violence. What happens if you're sitting there and somebody comes over and virtually punches you? I mean, does that count? Is that still assault? I don't know. Sexualization. Especially now with deep fakes and virtual realities, how comfortable are we with that? There's a lot of questions about that. I mean, I don't think many of us would feel very comfortable if somebody was creating a virtual avatar of ourselves or someone else, and using that for sexualization, or deep fake or anything like that. Which brings us to the legal risks of invasion of privacy, identity thieves, property issues, uncertain legal status of virtual actions. What actions can you take? Right? So if you have a virtual avatar, you have a picture of yourself and somebody does a deep fake on it, what can you do in a virtual world? And then they start walking around in the virtual environment as you. I mean, yeah, the possibilities seem endless right now because they haven't been defined. And so then abuse of power, manipulation, not transparency, political influence, use of data behind the scenes, right? So there's just a lot of questions. There's a lot of potential, but there's a lot of questions. And as cyber psychologists entering in this field and really paving the way here for understanding these new technologies and the impact they have on people, because one of the most important things about this field is we are diving into technology at light speed, taking in all the technology. But the way that we understand the impact in human behavior is not catching up at all. And so we as cyber psychologists and in this course, that will be what we'll be doing, is attempting to catch up and say, well, all right, we're jumping into these virtual environments and VR therapy, and what does this all mean? And what does this mean for people? And to be able to speak to that and understand that. And so that will bring us then, as we will talk about the current state of virtual reality throughout the whole semester. So if you have any questions about anything that we are going to be talking about, please feel free to reach out for any questions. Otherwise, I look forward to the rest of the semester. Thank you.